So, The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent is a Nicolas Cage film starring Nicolas Cage playing Nicolas Cage, or at least a version of Nicolas Cage. Um, I've heard in interviews that Cage has said this is like one of the harder roles to play because he's not so much playing himself as he's playing like an idea that a lot of people have of Nic Cage. Because the thing is, a lot of people have this vision in their mind of what they see Nic Cage as, and most people like equate him to like a B movie actor. They only recognize him from like his more recent efforts, like direct to video films and stuff like like Willy's Wonderland and oh goodness, wasn't quite direct to video, but what was it like Bangkok something he was in? A whole bunch of different. Basically, he's in a ton of films, and I like the fact that in this film he kind of appears more or less as the version that we expect of him, and also kind of like, but also the version that I think a lot of Nic Cage fans wish that he were more like in real life. Because there's a great scene where Cage is at the therapist, and he's telling his therapist how he can't stand when people say that he works too much, that he's in too many movies. And it just says Cage firing back, say like, well, it's my job, and I like doing this for a living, and I got to take jobs where I can get them. Because I know like a lot of people, because the thing is like Nicolas Cage, a lot of people think he's just a B movie actor. The thing is, people who say that, they're forgetting about other films he's been in, like Leaving Las Vegas and Moonlight and the most recent film from last year, Pig, which is one of the best films from that year. I almost kind of wish that this film came out a little bit later, just so that there could be more references to Pig, because they do reference a few other films in this Nicolas Cage movie, including, I did not expect them to reference Mandy, but they did. Mandy's a great horror film from 2018, if you haven't seen it yet. But I don't have to tell it to Nicolas Cage fans. So, Nicolas Cage is basically down on his luck. He's divorced from his wife. He can't connect with his daughter. He's too much of a film snob to connect with her. He can't land a job. His agent, who's played by Neil Patrick Harris, can't find anything for him. Like, he tries to read for people like David Gordon Green, but he can never quite get like that role, despite wanting to like perform right there, like read right there for the director in public, and it never takes. So his last job, the last thing that he has that can pay off his debts, is he has to go to Spain for someone's birthday party. So he goes to the basically the little, not quite little, but the mansion, I guess, of Javi, who's played by Pedro Pascal, who's basically the ultimate Nicolas Cage fan. He loves all his work. He has like a big shrine room to all his stuff. Like he's got like the guns from Face Off and the chainsaw from Mandy and the little like, what are they, like the green chemical warfare balls from The Rock and all that. He's basically in love with Nicolas Cage's work. And at first I love the fact that the film basically becomes most about like their friendship. Because at first, like, Cage is just like, he doesn't want to deal with anybody. He's, everyone's just like, oh, I'm biggest fan, I love you. And then, of course, when Javi says, like, hey, man, I got a screenplay. Could you be in my movie? And Cage is like, I get this all the time. I don't like doing this. But he eventually connects with Javi once they start talking about their favorite movies, and they realize, oh, they have a lot more in common. And then they start talking about, oh, we should write a screenplay together. And they do. And here's where the film kind of gets interesting, is that it veers into like very meta territory, similar to another Nicolas Cage film, Adaptation, where basically it's a film all about, trying to write a screenplay, but at the same time, the film itself is about what the screenplay is trying to be. So, it's not it's not as clever as Adaptation, mostly because like you can see where the correlation is here. Like at one point, Cage and Javi take a lot of drugs, and then they immediately say, hey, it'd be cool in our movie if the characters did a lot of drugs. And then, of course, later on they say, oh, we should have like a paranoia thriller angle. And then, of course, they get paranoid and think that people are after them. And I kind of like how it carries on with like the less interesting overall plot here, which is that while Cage is visiting Javi, he's tapped by the FBI, who believe that Javi has like a kidnapped girl who's being kidnapped because of his mob connections and like an upcoming election. Not a very interesting setting, but it does keep Cage engaged there, where he has to stay and try to figure out what Javi's all about. But at the same time, he becomes way more focused on the screenplay. And there's a lot of great meta commentary in there about how, like, oh, I don't know if we need an action angle. Would people actually go see it? Yeah, they might go see it. And there's like a lot of like very honest and like very relatable talk here, such as like, yeah, like Cage is all about saying, oh, we should do an adult drama. I like adult dramas. Oh, but God, nobody will go to the theater and see it because everyone just wants to see Marvel and Star Wars films. All these little kernels of truth and all these tiny little like citations they do of various Nicolas Cage films. I love it at one point, like when the FBI people are staking him out. One of them says like, oh my God, it's Nic Cage, from The Croods 2. And then this agent partner is like, what, Croods 2? It's like, yeah, have you seen Croods 2? It's like, no, I'm 40 years old. Why would I watch The Croods 2? So, and then of course, like there's a lot of people have circulated that clip online of the fact that Javi admits that one of his favorite films is Paddington 2. And then, of course, like, Cage calls him out because he's like, oh, you told me you like Dr. Caligari, and now you're telling me that you like Paddington 2, a commercial film? And it's like, have you watched it? And then they both watch it, and they cry their eyes out. It's a hilarious scene, but it's perfectly timed, too, because it works for the relationship dynamic between Javi and Cage, because, like, Cage realizes that there's more to life than he thought, and he just needed someone who seemed to have his same taste to connect with him and say like, oh, there are actually commercial films that are good. There's more to life than that. And then of course, by the third act, it's kind of sad that like by the third act, there's not a lot of huge surprises. By that point, the film was pretty much on autopilot to become the action film that a lot of people were kind of expecting from it, where Nic Cage would actually, take part in an action film. You have it connect around where, he mends that relationship with his ex-wife and daughter. He actually is able to get a movie off the ground. So it's basically, by the third act, it's pretty much on track to be like the happy ending everyone expects it to be. It's quite it's a little bit similar to how, I don't know how many people will go this far back, but the Player kind of reminded me a lot of that by how it got like to the end of the film, even though it's nowhere near like the catharsis of like the Player. So maybe it's not quite as similar, but it does have like a similar stage where it's like, oh, we actually got a movie off the ground and we actually managed to produce it. So like for like the meta commentary, the film is a lot of fun on that angle, and thankfully they do focus on the better moments. It does feel like the whole deal with like the FBI and the mafia subplot just kind of peters out by the third act, where it feels like more obligatory to wrap it up rather than present any new big twists or changes, which is kind of sad because there's a few decent twists in like the second act that it's kind of like sad that it doesn't go even nuttier with like the third act. But I will say though, it does have a lot of fun with like Nicolas Cage, or at least like the version that a lot of people like kind of view Nicolas Cage as. It does have some very self-aware comedy. I do like the fact that they bring back the Nicolas Cage from the David Lynch film Wild at Heart. Basically, the Wild at Heart Nicolas Cage appears in this film as his ego to basically remind him like, no, you don't have to settle for less. You're Nick, and I can't do this with my voice right now, Nick Loud Wolf Scream Cage. So in parentheses, put that in there. So like on meta for like the meta commentary alone, it was a lot of fun. I could not stop smiling and laughing at this film. I just wish that the script had like a little bit more faith to become a little bit more referential and throw in like a few more twists to it, because it feels like when you do films like this that have this type of commentary, that it kind of like wraps around too easily. I don't know, maybe part of me was kind of hoping that it would go a little bit more of like, like the referential route that like Seth Rogen's films would go in, where characters would go into bizarre places and would have not quite the same happy ending. But for a film that's all about just celebrating Nicolas Cage, more or less, it gets the job done. And I think in the long run, what it will do is, for like a lot of people who are just expecting Nic Cage to just be all over the place and bizarre and crazy. This is a little bit more of like a heartfelt film that I think a lot more people will probably look back on his filmography and go, oh yeah, actually Cage is actually a pretty damn good actor. Like this is not quite like my fear was that this was kind of just going to be Nicolas Cage's My Name is Bruce, similar to like the Bruce Campbell referential film, which is just kind of like just poking fun at all the B-movie stuff and then throwing him into a B-movie. But thankfully it's not that. It's a love letter to Cage, and hopefully for a lot of people who have seen Nicolas Cage only as like the B-movie actor, they'll be inspired enough to go watch stuff like, like Con Air and Mandy and The Rock and Gone in 60 Seconds and be able to recognize like the actor for what he does. Because like Nicolas Cage is one of those actors where it never feels like he phones it in. He's always throwing everything that he can at the screen and definitely engages himself in his work. And this film definitely shows a lot of that love and commitment, while at the same time having a lot of fun with the character and more or less the process of writing a movie. So on that level, as meta commentary akin to like adaptation and The Player, this film just works.